Hello, welcome to another episode of What Are You Selling with me, David Green. And joining me today, I am delighted to be with the amazing J.A. Andrews. How are you doing today?
Very good, very good.
I've been really looking forward to chatting to you because what I'm doing at the moment in this part, I interview a lot of new authors, which is great because I am also a new author, but I interview mainly like new authors that had one book out or this and this, and which is fantastic. But what I'm trying to do at the minute is interview authors that I like really, really love their work and that I've read before. So this is like a real thrill to have you on because the Keeper Chronicles is brilliant. So I'm just going to get that out there right at the start. If people are at home watching us on YouTube or listening to us on Spotify or Anchor FM, and you've not picked up the Keeper Chronicles before, what are you doing with your lives?
That is really funny. It's funny because I published the first one in 2016 was the first time I published, but I still feel very new. Like it's been, what does that make us, 7 years out, 6 years out, 5 years out? I can't even do the math anymore. But yeah, it just feels, there are so many new authors, and I met so many new authors who are just great, and they're just like killing it straight out of the gun. And I was like, didn't know what I was doing at all at the beginning. But yeah, it's funny to not be the new author anymore, to have somehow moved into like the slightly, I'm like older. Like I always talk about older and younger authors, and I don't mean their age at all, but just
right.
in author years.
Yeah, because like that's the thing is, like I say, I'm a new author, I'm a younger author, but I'm also almost 40, so it's like I'm not like young, I'm like just there. But it's funny that you say that like you didn't you have some people that come out straight off the bat and do really, really well, because like when I kind of started getting into like the indie world of writing and getting kind of around and reading other people's work, I'd already read yours. So when I came across you on Indie Fancy Addicts, I was like, oh my God, like what is she doing here?
Oh, that's so shocking.
Yeah, because like I don't know why. I never really up until like I started kind of like writing myself and doing all that kind of stuff, I never really kind of looked at like publishers or anything on what it all meant. So I just presumed that you were just like, just doing all the conventions, doing all the tours, doing all this kind of thing. And I was like, oh, so it was like really like, because like I say, like I think the first Keeper Chronicles book came up on, like, I read it in like 2017, I think, and it came up as recommended on just from something else that I was reading at the time, and so I've been reading it since then. So it was like,
Wow.
yeah. So obviously you're doing something right. You got.
Well, that's exciting. Yeah, there were a few years ago, it was easier to get some of those recommendation engines kind of offering your book to similar people, so that was always good. But I was really lucky early on to get to the right audience, I think, with those books, because they're not grim, dark really at all. And so there's just this, and they're written for adults. Like the main character in that first book is like 45 years old, but they're clean. Like I write them so that my kids could read them whenever they want to, and my kids are like 10 to 15 years old. So there's this very specific audience, and it's a little bit of luck, I think, that at the very beginning I found them, and I found them through some Facebook groups, I think, mostly. But I think that really helped like keep Amazon sending it to the right people, because a few people that really love sort of gritty, grimdark stuff that have picked up my books are just so disappointed, because it takes a really long time for somebody to even die, and then it's usually not gruesome at all. There's never entrails or anything. So
right. Well, that's you don't want that in every story, though. That's I like to. I mean, I like to read grimdark to an extent. Like, I like Joe Abercrombie. I really like him. If we talk about traditional authors, Andy Peliquin, I really like as well. And people like that. But also, when you've read like one or two of them on bounce, it's kind of like I think I'm okay with grimdark for a little while. I'd like to read something a little bit hopeful. With some
yeah, me too.
Yeah. And that's what I try to do with mine as well. Like mine is like verging towards grimdark, but also not everyone is horrible. Like there's some nice things in there, and I try to write clean as well. Like I came up with my own swearing system. So it'd be like, these are
Mhm.
fine in case a child reads it.
Yes, exactly. You're not teaching kid brand new words that their parents are like, what?
Exactly. So you first published in 2016, which, you know, it's kind of 6 years ago, but the last 2 years kind of don't count, which is probably why you feel like really, really. But you've been so
Yeah.
like, prolific since then, because you've done two, like, so when this interview goes live, you've got a new book out, which is book
Mhm.
3 in the Keeper Origins series. So congratulations, happy release day.
Thank you. Thanks.
So that's two full trilogies that you've had out in 6 years, which is, and you've done short stories and you've done other things as well. So, you know, was this always the plan to be a writer? And if not, I always say this, and everyone always laughs through. I was like, no, it's never a
No.
plan. So what?
Who even?
Yeah,
I didn't even know it was possible.
so
Uh,
you stumbled into it. I mean,
yeah.
pretty much, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, 100%. So my degree is in aerospace engineering, which has
Wow.
nothing to do with fantasy whatsoever.
Right.
Um, there's not a lot of jobs in the whole rocket science world. And so I did some other forms of engineering for a few years and was fairly bored by it all. So, but I never even wrote creatively. Like I know there's so many authors who were like, have these amazing like stories they wrote when they were kids. And they were like, I would have dreamed of being an author. And I just never did. Like, I mean, I read like crazy, but I never would have thought of creative writing. And then, so it wasn't until like I had some kids and quit the engineering thing to stay home. We had moved anyway to rural Missouri, which is like middle of the US, no
Yep.
big cities, no engineering firms whatsoever. So I just stayed home with the kids, and my husband actually went out of town for a month. This was a long time ago. So we had email. I don't know if we had cell phones or not, but so he was really bored. So I would like, I just decided to write him a chapter a day that he could read when he got home from his work there. And so he'd have something. And my whole goal was to make it like entertaining and end on a cliffhanger. So he was like tortured till the next day when he had to read the next thing. And so, yeah, so those like it, and I didn't start at the beginning of the month, but that's my debut novel is A Thread of Shadows. And the beginning of that book, probably the first quarter of that book, came out of those emails that I wrote to him. So I had started it, and once he came back into town, I set it aside and didn't think about it again for years. Although I loved the characters, so I would like think about it some. And I kind of looked in traditional publishing, but the whole querying agents, I was like, I won't do it. Like, I know I won't. That's
Yeah.
not me to like take 100 refusals. Like, I'll just give up. So when I discovered indie authors was a thing, Lindsay Buroker was the first person that I saw writing books I would want to write and read, and like actually like selling them. And I thought, oh, like maybe I could do that. And so probably around 2014, I got really serious about it and had to learn a lot about writing a book and tried to learn everything about marketing. And I still didn't really know what I was doing when I published, but yeah, it wasn't until about then that I even thought it was a possibility. And even at that time, I was still like, well, it'll hopefully, if I can sell enough, I can maybe pay for the cover of my next book. Like that was my big goal, you know, can I pay for my covers and my editors? And if so, I'm winning. So the fact that it's really gone well is just, it's still pretty shocking on a daily basis that it's going so well.
You know, going well is kind of an understatement, because like, like I said, like you're probably one of the first indie writers, fantasy wise, that I discovered, without even kind of looking for books. And then, you know, we're in a lot of the same kind of groups, like indie fantasy addicts and other things, and your books are getting recommended by people all the time, like all the time. So
Yeah.
I think it just goes to show that, like, you know, there is such a great achievement that like this was your first attempt at writing a book as well. Not only was it your first book, it was your first attempt, because you get a lot of people that say, oh, this is my first book that was published, but I wrote like 4 novels that will never ever see the light of day. And this is like your first one, which is just like incredible. So you said that you were a big reader. What kind of things were you reading before you started writing?
So I grew up on like real classic fantasy. My older brother had a great library of stuff. So I read, I mean, I started with Tolkien, obviously, but David Eddings and Raymond D. Feist and Weiss and Hickman, and just all these, like all the Dragonlance and all the Pern, and just all these, they're just super classic
Yes.
80s fantasy. And I mean, I would just like take my babysitting money and like go to the mall and go to the little bookstore and like hope something new had come out. And but yeah, just tons of reading of just really classic stuff. And so I think I don't think anybody who reads my books is surprised by that. Like it's all pretty classic. I mean, I have like elves and dwarves as elvish and dwarvish as probably they come.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's what I was, and then college and little babies came, and so I kind of fell off of reading because
Right.
there was no, I just fell asleep too fast. So I totally missed out. Like I've never read Sanderson, and I feel like that's like some kind of like black mark on my author report card, because I've never, my daughter just discovered Sanderson and she's like blazing through everything he's ever written. But and now I'm like, his books are so long, I just can't dedicate the time. So there's a big gap in my reading between like young stuff and like, mostly I read indies today because I know so many of them and there's so many great ones out there.
There is, and that's the thing now with indie. Like I'm a big classic fantasy fan as well. Like, and I like a lot of modern stuff too. But there's something very cozy about going back to like one of the classics. Like I mean, I went back to read the Belgariad at the start of the pandemic when it was all in lockdown. Because like I just want something that's like a blanket that I've read like a load of times before. And but like with the indie world now, there's so many different voices, and the quality of the storytelling is just on a par with trad. And then that's one of the things that I really liked about the Keeper Chronicles, is that it is classic fantasy in that way, where it is like these, you know, classical creatures and all this kind of stuff, but you have this real modern focus on characters that I think is really, really great, and it really kind of sets it apart. Because when you look at those kind of things, like Eddins, the characters are all very much the same. Like, you know, he goes a different series and it's the same story with the same character with different names.
Same character. Yes.
So I really like that. And what I really, and this is what I've been really looking forward to talking to you about, in particular about the Keeper Chronicles, is that the Keepers are like obviously the magicians, but they're also like storytellers and historians as well. And I just think that's just so amazing, because I love stories and I love this history as well. And this was like, when I first started reading, I was like, this was written just for me, because it's all the stuff that
I did. I was like, who should I write this for? Oh, this David Green guy. I'll write for him.
Right, well, thanks very much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah,
so
anytime.
Where did the idea come for the Keepers to be like so scholarly like that? Because obviously in a lot of classic fantasy, you do get these kind of like societies of like mages and whatever, and they are like kind of like, you know, they study and everything, but to actually make them like storytellers and historians, where did that come from?
A big part of it is I have zero like martial arts training and no fighting things, and writing any kind of fight scene that's even like a minimal quick attack scene by like some monster is like insanely hard for me. And so I wasn't going to make like, you know, the world's greatest swordsman as my main character. And I have, when I first started, the thing I really wanted to like really capture was that like that wonder and that comfort from like the Belgariad and these old stories, that I was just so absorbed in their world and just the story. Like I just loved the story. So when I realized that I could have more like scholarly storyteller people as the main character, and then I got to geek out on all the things that I wanted to do with the stories. Like I could have them talk about how stories work and why we love them, and because they were already that people. So in the second book, where the main character is just his skill, it's really storytelling. That was just so fun because I just feel like there's so much power in this idea of a story, and it
Right.
can bring people together and it can teach so much. And it was nice to have a character who could just like live that and just feel so passionate about it that I could geek out in my book about it all.
And it's a really great way to get story world building across in your world as well, because that's always one of the biggest tricks for me, as a reader of fantasy, and the writer, is how do you get across this world building without just being like, here is just like, I mean, my favorite series is Wheel of Time. I love Wheel of Time. Warts and all, I'm well aware of the many flaws in the series, but I love it despite it. And one of those big flaws is that, particularly in the first book, you'd have characters that would just appear in Emmons Field, where it sets off a new character, and they'd be like, I have a story to tell about the world that we live in. Here's a big story, right? And it'd just be like paragraph after paragraph after paragraph of like, and then 2,000 years ago on this land, this battle happened, and this was because, right? And you can't really do that anymore in storytelling, because people are like, this, it needs to be more like this. So I thought like having the keepers being this way was such like a really smooth way of handling it. Was that a part of it, or was that just something that kind of like, oh yeah, this works as well?
No, it just happened. I really wish I could be like, I really mastermind this whole thing and it's worked out perfectly, but so much of it has just fallen into place. It helps with everything too, because I can string whole, like every story in my world, which I don't really feel like leaving this world. I really like this world. But the fact that my main characters are these storytellers, I can just link like every story because they just tell them and it's natural that they're telling them. So it's worked out just great. And I did not plan it. It really was more of a just what would I find to be like the most fun thing. If I could wield magic, would I want to be like a battle mage? And I would not. But someone who could just like tell stories really well or just learn really interesting things.
Yeah.
Like that sounded more fun.
I think that sounds great as well. That's definitely what I would be doing. I'll just be drinking tea and studying
Yeah.
things, and maybe wine on a weekend or something. Just
Mm-hmm.
to go a bit, just to go a bit mad. So for people that haven't read Keeper Chronicles, and then Origins, if we can not spoil Origins quite as much, why don't you tell us a little bit about what it's about?
Okay, so the keepers are storytellers and historians, and they're in general fairly they're the good guys, right? They're not they have like oaths of sort of like trying to keep the peace, and they work as advisors to the queen and kings and stuff, but they definitely like these are the good guys. And so the Keeper Chronicles each book follows a different keeper, which again I would never have done where I starting now, but I didn't realize how many people will not pick up a book 2 when if it follows a whole new character from book 1. But anyway, but they do. There's 3 different keepers in the Chronicles, and they each have their own sort of issues that they're working through. The way that the characters feel interesting to me is if they're having some major internal struggle more than like the external world struggle. So they do end up like having to sort of save the world as you would expect in a fantasy book, but usually it's more like internal. So when the Keeper Chronicles begin, this is not a spoiler past like the 5th page or something, Alaric, who's the main character, his wife is dying and he's partly responsible for what happened. And he, despite the fact that they're these historians and they're really knowledgeable and they have this huge library and they have magic, he hasn't been able to save her. And he's ended up doing really questionable things in an effort to find like any kind of magic, even if it's stuff he would normally never deal with that would maybe save her. And so his whole book is sort of his last desperate chance to see. She's in like a magical coma the whole time, so we don't see her very much. But that whole first book is his trying to come up with any way to save her and really struggling with this idea. He had kind of walked away from the keepers for a while, and he comes back, and they really need him. The world is sort of in trouble, and they need him to be a keeper again. And he's very much struggling with this whole idea of what I thought I would have been and the choices I've actually made in life, and what does that mean to me? Like, have I done things that I cannot go back from. Can I never be what I wanted to be because I've made too many bad choices? And so that struggle, which I feel like is a very midlife crisis kind of struggle, this idea of, like I have these ideas of what I thought I would have been, right? And then I've gone through, 40 years of life, and I didn't become that person, and am what I am today. Is it a problem? Can I still change? Do I want to change? And so there's a lot of that kind of struggle that goes on, and then there's people trying to destroy the world at the same time, and he has to try and step up. But that's a lot. It's a lot more close personal struggles, I think, in the book than the whole world is falling apart and we need to go.
Right. So, yeah. It's very character driven and very character focused. Yeah. Which is great, which I really enjoyed, and is a great character. So you talked before about not knowing what you was doing when you first started publishing, and just before as well when you said about switching protagonists between books and everything. How, when you kind of look at it, is there anything that you would have done different, seeing as where you are now with, like, your trilogies, that these 2 trilogies are finished? Is there anything that you would have done differently, or are you kind of happy with where you've got to?
I don't know, because my the business part of my brain says I would have made my first trilogy less of different standalone books and more of an overarching story, which they're not. But when I wrote the first one, I didn't really expect anyone to ever read it. And so I thought, well, sure, there's ideas for book 2. But then when it actually sold some copies and got reviews, and I was like, oh, now I have to write a book 2, but I've wrapped up everything that should have happened in book 1. So now what do I do? So if I were starting all over, I would probably find a way to make it more of an overarching trilogy, because I just know a ton of my reviews for book 2 say I wasn't going to pick this up because it changed characters, and I gave it a chance and I'm glad I did.
Right.
Or it took a year for me to bother to pick this book up because we changed characters. So I think that's really my big thing. But at the same time, 3 different characters really let me explore a ton of world building and a ton of the different kinds of magic. In a way that I would have had a hard time with if it was just one, because I only write single point of view books, so there wasn't all the different multiple viewpoints that I could have had. So it's worked out fine, and it's the same universe or same world as my Keeper Origins. Origins actually happens hundreds of years earlier, but they're both kind of standalone trilogies. They reference each other, but they don't. You can read them in any order. But so I think that's the only thing I would have done differently. But at the same time, I'm happy with how that trilogy came out. So I'm not itching to go back and fix it or change it or anything like that. So.
And you've done a few short stories and little things like that. So you said before you don't want to leave this world. But also before you also said, well, this is finished now. But is it really finished? Is there more stories to tell in this world in some kind of way?
Many, yes, definitely. So my whole plan for going forward is just self-standing trilogies in the world. And so wherever I put them on the timeline of the world, I want each individual trilogy to be able to be read by whoever finds it. I don't want you to have to have gone through them in a certain order. But I'm perfectly happy to not do more world building. I know there's so many fantasy authors who love the world building part, and they're happy to make new magic systems, and I don't want to. I'd rather just explore the characters living inside the world that's already fleshed out enough in my head that I can just drop them in and we can go have a story about them. So
yeah, I think that's a great way to look at it, because it's only because when you spend time creating a world, and obviously the world works because people enjoy reading the stories in it and all that kind of stuff, is why just because that one story is finished in that little part of the world doesn't mean that there isn't stories that are going on somewhere else, that are stories that are happening in the future or in the past. And I think I don't ever see the problem in going back to the same world again and doing more stuff, because people want it, right? People have been telling stories in Star Wars for 40 odd years, right? And it's there's no end in sight.
no end in sight. And we're dying for another really good one. We're like, because we all love the world. We're like, give us another great Star Wars story and we will just love you for it. Right.
Yeah, I'm really excited for Obi-Wan Kenobi coming out this month, because I have a love, not really, I won't say hate, because I don't really hate anything, but I have a complicated relationship with the prequels, as many people do. But I love Hugh McGregor. Hugh McGregor was so good as Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Yes.
And I can't wait to see him again. I'm so looking forward to it.
Yes. And I mean, he's just such a amazing, the character is already established in our brains, and he's just such an amazing character. Like we all they could never give us too much Obi-Wan. We just would,
Right.
like, I'll just watch him go through a normal day's life. Like, great.
Yes. That's what I want to see. I want to see him just in his cave, just hanging out, just being sad.
Exactly.
Just thinking about what could have been. He's like, why did Yoda send me over here for? Like, I could have tried again, I guess, to kill Anakin.
Yeah, I could have done something, and here I am in the desert.
Yeah. He gave up. That's one of the things that like makes me laugh about. I'm going off on a mad tangent here about Star Wars, but that often happens whenever I'm around these places. Like, I don't know how you feel about The Last Jedi or anything, but I love The Last Jedi. But I always found it really funny that people were like, Luke gave up. It's like, well, like Yoda tried to beat the Emperor once and then banished himself to Dagobah. Like, so it's not different.
This is what the Jedi do.
Yeah,
they try once and then they go somewhere. Yeah, they go somewhere obscure.
Yeah, they're just like, you know what? I tried once.
I'm done. Somebody else can save the universe.
Yeah. Would you ever two parts to this question, actually? I always find it's quite an interesting one. Would you ever like to work in someone else's world, like be it like Star Wars, or be it someone that you know and admire? And would you ever like someone to work in your world and tell a story in your world?
I'm going to say no to both of them. I'm like, no, it's mine. I have a very hard time getting like deeply involved in other worlds enough to make me want to like spend I usually write one book a year, so I'm just in that world for just so long daily. And so I don't know that I can imagine another world that I'd want to be creating in. There are worlds that I enjoy consuming, whatever they tell me, the stories they tell me about it. But yeah, I can't think of a time when I would really want to be in another world. And having someone in mind, like a lot of authors will do even co-authoring and things like that. And I just feel like that feels it makes me feel like I'm a huge control freak, because I would be like, no, you don't get to decide that. My choice, not yours. It's mine. So I find co-authoring just like fascinating, that other authors, like, because they just seem to love it.
Yeah.
And I think it would be very hard for me to not have just absolute control. So there we go. I think I'm a control freak about it.
There'll be loads of people watching this that are all like, oh, I really wanted to write a story, and now it's off the table.
Yep, not happening.
I'm the same as you with the co-authoring thing. Like, whenever I talk to someone who does co-author, I'm fascinated by it, because it's like, I just like, how does it work? Who does what? Right? And what happens if you disagree with it? And I've heard so many different like answers. I was interviewing them both at the same time, actually, the co-authors and the writer series, and they actually work in the same document at the same time, so they can see what each other are like typing, and they'll be changing each other's sentences. And that sounds like chaos.
That sounds horrible. Yeah, I'm not gonna do that with anyone. I can say pretty firmly I won't do that.
I think I would like to do it, I think, at some point, but obviously with the right person. But like I would be like kind of not so much like telling people what my boundaries are, but I'd be like, you need to tell me what yours are, so like I do not do anything wrong with this.
Exactly.
I'm terrified of doing it. I'd be like, I'm so sorry. It's all up to you.
I think that I'm not like particularly, I was going to say not particularly linear. I do write in order. Like I start at the beginning of the book and I write through, but like on any given day, there's a lot of like write, revise. Like there's this really cyclical and then like out to plot level and then down to sentence level. And it's just, I feel like I'm not sure where I would invite someone else into the process because I'm not that straightforward of a writer. I want to be in different levels of it all at the same time. So I usually don't even let critique partners look at it till I've written at least a quarter to a half of the book, and then I'll send them stuff. My beginnings are always a disaster. So I usually send the first 25% to some like 2 or 3 trusted people and then discuss all the things I've done wrong and try to fix them as I'm writing further on. But I think, yeah, I have a hard time imagining how it would play out, like practically, how I would invite someone else into what's, I mean, it is fairly messy what I'm doing while I'm writing. So
Right. Well, that's interesting. It's good. It's good to know. Because some people like it's a very horror writer thing where people are like, oh, I'd love someone to come and write a story in this. It's kind of like a rite of passage, I think. Kind of like Lovecraft and all that kind of stuff and everything. But a lot of fantasy authors are kind of like, no, this is mine.
it's mine. Back off.
You don't know how long I've spent thinking about this world.
Exactly.
So another just random writing question. Obviously, you write fantasy and epic fantasy and character-driven fantasy. Is there a different genre that you'd ever like to try to write, or is it just strictly fantasy for you?
Really strictly fantasy. So like you and I, like we both, there's so many indie author friends, right, that we have, and I just in lots of these communities, and they're just amazing people. And I talk to them, and they're just very like, they all have so many ideas, and they'll, or they'll do epic fantasy and then some urban fantasy, right? And they'll do all these different things, and it's also related, and it makes total sense to me that they would have all these stories. But the only stories I get excited about are like character-driven epic fantasy, like excited enough to write. Like reading, I can do like some Regency stuff and some urban fantasy and just some like whatever. I mean, I can do a bunch of different reading, but for writing, really sort of the second world epic fantasy is, at least up to this point, the only thing I felt excited enough to. It just takes so much time. It's the only thing I'm excited enough to like put that much energy and time into. So
yeah. So what do you think is we talked a little bit before we started recording about you kind of finished with this arc. Is there any kind of, I know you're not really sure about what it is you are going to do next, but is there any kind of inkling of like what direction you might go into? Is it going to be, obviously it's going to be still stories in the same world? Have you kind of had any like little inklings or little when you've been writing something else and ideas pops in, you'd be like,
oh, I do. Have you read the Ryria? I don't know, Michael Sullivan's?
No.
Okay. Not. They're excellent, by the way. You'd probably love them. But they have this, it's almost like a buddy cop thing. There's like a ex sort of assassin rogue sort of character, and another guy who, if he were like well off, he'd be sort of like the paladin knight guy, except he's never been quite that well off. And the two of them have this great friendship that just goes, through the entire series. And they sell the series, and there's just great side characters. It's all really wonderful. But I read those and I realized how I don't know of any books that have two female characters that are just great friends, have been friends for years, know each other like perfectly, and are doing something in an epic fantasy sort of situation. I'm not huge on romance in my books. Like there'll be subplots of romance sometimes, but in general, like there's so many other sorts of relationships that are so fascinating to me and so nuanced, right? Like romance has nuances too, but there's lots of romance stories out there. And so I would really like to do probably a female keeper and a female elf who are just the closest of friends, and just I have no idea what they will do or where they will battle, but I have this idea of them, one of them being rather like bookish and cautious, and the other one just being very go get them. Just so
That sounds cool, because it is great to kind of look at those kind of relationships that don't really get explored that much, because that was one of the things that I was kind of thinking of with In Solitude Shadow. Was like the main, there's a few different there's a few different POVs in it, but kind of the main one is a woman in her early 30s, and like her male companion who is like 108, who is like, it's not like sexual or anything, it's they're very good friends. And I kind of just wanted to like explore that, where it's just like, these people are just friends and they're just completely different generations from each other, but like, they have the same job as each other, and they like spending time with each other. So let's just see how that works.
Well, I think so often the relationships are they're so fascinating. They're the ones that we want to read about and the ones we remember, even in like the Marvel universe sometimes, or just places there's just an enormous cast of characters. It's like often there's these friendships or sibling relationships or parent-child relationships or whatever, like that really stick with us and that we just end up really rooting for, because there's so many interesting dynamics that can go into a relationship like that. So yeah, I love those kind of things.
Yeah, so like a female body cop one where they're actually friends sounds really refreshing, actually, because that's one of the things as well where what a lot of people, I don't know what the temptation always comes in, that if there's like female characters that they have to be at odds for some reason a lot of the time. It's like, even if it's like there's no real reason for it, it's like we just don't like each other. It's like, well,
well,
I'm sure women like each other.
we do, we generally do.
Yeah.
And there's so many female authors, and I just think we all, most of us anyway, have close female friends. Like, I mean, I have the lifelong friends who I can not talk to for years, and if I pick up the phone, it's like we never, right? Like we haven't ever been apart. And I mean, some of them I grew up with, and still like I can just step right back in, even though they're nothing like me now, right? We were friends in elementary school because we went to the same church, right? And that was the basis for it.
Yes.
But yeah, so I just think it'd be really fun to explore just some, and not even have, just have that be the way the two people are connected.
Ideas as to how something should be, like, I think but just how things should be attacked.
Right. So. Yeah. No, that sounds great, and I can't wait to read it. Obviously, when you start getting, I'm going to hold you to it. I'm going to be like, this time next year, I'm going to be like, where is this story?
Where is it?
I need
yes.
to. Sounds great.
Okay.
So for everyone who's watching and listening to us on the Guild podcast or on the YouTube channel, all of J. Andrews' links to social media, website, books, and everything will be in the show notes. So please do check those out. Buy the books, buy them, read them, tell everyone about them. That's what we want. But where is the best place to kind of find you if anyone is curious and they want to come and like say hello, or want to check out what you're up to? Where's the best places to find you on the internet?
Well, my website, jaandrews.com, is easy. There's contacting there. You can find me. I'm probably on Facebook more than any of the others. I have stuff on other social media, but I don't. Like Twitter gives me kind of like emotional whiplash because it's just so much like back and forth. And Instagram, I don't really do like pictures and visual stuff. So Instagram, I'm like, but Facebook's probably the place to find me. If there happened to be an indie fantasy addicts, of course, like we spend lots of times there. It's a great group if you're looking for a good group of fantasy readers. But yeah, probably Facebook is the place to find me, or my website.
Excellent. And the same. Yeah, I mean, we have to have everything, but like my Instagram is always like the last thing, because I'm like, I don't know anything interesting to take a photo of.
Me neither.
So I can't put a GIF on it or anything that someone's already done. So I'll just ignore it for now.
Me too. I'm like, I
Well,
work in words, typed words.
exactly. That's right. Well, thank you so much for coming on and spending some time when we talk about the show. And yeah, thank you so much for your books. They're always a real pleasure to read.
Okay, well, thank you so much. This was really fun. I was all excited when you asked me to join. I was like, oh, I could be on David's. This is exciting. I've arrived.
Okay. And for everyone that has stayed with us until the end, until next time, thank you very much.